Well, welcome everyone. I think I already kicked off the video. Yep. So, so just for the video, we're kicking off the API specification toolbox weekly office hours. Um, I'm I'm enjoying the build. I'm amazed each week how new people find out that we're talking, and they're adding it to their calendar. So I'm hoping we're gonna keep getting more attention and more people interested in what we're talking about here, because this is how it builds over time, just spreading the word. I saw a couple people chiming in on the questions that we were doing as well, so I thought that was pretty good, answering some of the questions on API specs. Before I dive into what I'm working on, what are you all working on? You guys do anything besides conferences the last couple weeks?
Yeah, I participated to my first ever Open API initiative technical committee meeting. It was exciting.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So what do you think? Are you're gonna make regular time to be able to invest in it?
And I think I was kind of hesitant if it was too kind of too deep for me or something, or like, you know, uh, how to catch up. But I think that it it started almost making sense, and now in the app conference this week, it made even more sense. so yeah, I think I'll try to.
Well, good. I hope you uh, take the time to get up to speed and figure out all the personalities and everything, because we really
Mm.
need to keep bringing, expanding that pool of people and eyes on it. So it's good to see you there. What else is cooking? Anybody doing anything interesting around the specs? No. Well, I haven't had too much time to work on stuff, but I've been playing catch up on some of the work that I had from before. Made sure all the videos, again, for people just joining on the video. We run everything from a homepage of the API specification toolbox org. There's a home repo, and try to keep everything accessible here. We're adding in ideas using GitHub issues, and if you want to join in on any of the ideas and submit any ideas or help move forward any of these ideas, we'd love your help. We definitely could use some assistance there. And then there's a handful that we've taken and we've got in motion in some way, and those include identifying people who are part of the spec conversation, service providers, tooling, and other things. If you don't catch these in person, you can catch all the videos and try to keep them up here. I didn't get the last two up in a timely fashion, I apologize, but I try to get them up as quickly as I can. And then all the projects we're kind of breaking out into separate repos. The last edition being the questions, which we kind of been we're doing the week before the Labor Day weekend. So, whoops, why isn't that working? GitHub. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Good job, Ken. So we'll fix that typo. But the questions repo is where we've been asking questions and then answering some of them. I'm gonna stop asking questions and I'm gonna answer more, because they're kind of getting overloaded. But that's just example of one project that we've kind of broken out what we're doing. I've spent some time working on the service providers, because I'm trying to reach out to more folks, and this is the API service providers repo. I now have a listing page where it lists all the API service providers here with their website, their GitHub, and their Twitter accounts. Excuse me, because I'm building relationships and talking to all these people about their usage of specs and how they use them. So you can check that out in the service providers repo. I did the same for the toolbox, because as I said before, I'm reaching out to folks. Where's the tools? There it is. reaching out about open source tools, you can go to the homepage of this repo, and there's a link here to the tools. And I've done it for OpenAPI and Swagger. I'll get async and JSON schema up here pretty quickly, but you can look at all the GitHub repos for all the interesting OpenAPI related tools. So I'm going through these, and because this is all YAML driven, I'm gonna update kind of a rating for all of these, because right now they're rated by their likes, their stars, the follows, all of that. I'm gonna start rating them based upon activity and whether someone's still actively maintaining it, which will add another dimension to that. So if you want to get involved in the tools or the service stuff, feel free to jump in. I think what else is pressing you guys? Well, one of the ideas I threw out so I had my 9 o'clock session right after this that I was opening up for discussion with other folks, and bringing in, I had a conversation with Twitter one week, and just bringing in folks to talk about their usage of OpenAPI. I'm playing around with maybe doing some interviews with folks, because the people I'm reaching out to as part of that API service provider work and the tooling, I'm thinking about maybe start scheduling some interviews. I don't know if I'm going to call it a podcast or what, but I've got people with a lot of opinions on OpenAPI, on async API, on JSON schema, and Postman collections, and so I really kind of want to just maybe start with some asynchronous conversations around that. So if one of you would like to do one of those with me, that might kick it off and be interesting, just a one-on-one, and we can make it as long or as short as you'd like. So if you have any interest in that, I started a thread under the home repo issues, and it's the latest API specs podcast. I'm still not sure if it's going to be audio or if it'll be video and screen share, so that we can share little bits. But have a couple of folks, Fran from Async said he would be interested in having some discussions. Abhijit from Postman, talking about Postman collections and how we use OpenAPI. So I'm going to start doing some of those and fill that time, because I kind of have 2 hours dedicated for my Friday. You didn't get your echo fixed, did you, Manuel?
I did not, huh? Okay, let me put on headphones. You knew.
I knew it was you. I have so many conversations with you. I know it was you.
Hey, while Emmanuel is fixing the echo, Jane is writing here about the conference, and yeah, there was a request about having kind of webinars or interviews or podcasts around these topics, and I was thinking also one topic that came up in the last OAI, like the CSP or whatever, the acronyms are killing me, but the meeting, it's kind of like what is belonging to the OpenAPI spec or this kind of a spec, and what is not, because there was this interesting question about kind of coordinates and geographical data and the kind of the OpenAPI spec for that, and is it like should it be part of the spec or should it not be? And actually that led into a discussion about data formats and how to kind of handle those together with the actual spec. And I think that could be one interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah.
I would be happy to at least discuss that or listen to somebody else discuss that.
Yeah, no, let me cue that up. I would love to talk through some of that with you if you want to.
Yeah, and there was this one guy in the group from Netherlands who kind of brought it up, so he might also be interested. And I know a few kind of people who are very into that scene.
Well, I don't have to do these like Friday 9 a.m. or I happen to be flexible on the time, and because we can just kind of prepare loosely and get people to the table. And So if you have a time that works for you, I would love to coordinate directly with you.
Right. I mean, that time also works for me. I mean, it's not that bad.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and tentatively say maybe next week.
Hmm.
We after this, we just kind of jump on and have a conversation and see where we can take
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
just similar to this project, I just kind of want to start loose and see where it goes. And I was just talking with Ben from JSON Schema on Twitter. He tuned in. He saw my tweet about this today, and so I think I'm going to get him on. I'd like to get him talking on a session as well and see where we can go and get some other folks.
My suggestion would be make it video.
Mhm.
There's a few audio API podcasts out there. I think having video would make really make a difference. I think it's a great idea.
I like it. I agree. I mean, I'm thinking
Yeah.
just because it's spec related, the ability to share a screen and have that component as well as seeing
Right.
people's faces, I think is pretty
Yeah.
critical.
I think it's a better thing.
Agreed. Yeah, so I'm gonna figure out if it's, you know, I'll play with the format and see, but try to make it similar to the questions, one where try to keep them. I don't know how short. We'll see how it goes, but and then just play with it, see what we can do, and get them up on YouTube and see what happens. So. Yeah, interesting. This I think I really feel like the industry level, the geodata, the travel, the healthcare, the financial. I really feel like these specs are going to be kind of the driving force behind the next wave of growth of Open API and async. I feel like industries are kind of the next frontier to stabilize, and I would be interested in hearing folks, you know, should the OAI step up and have specific groups that are dedicated to industries? Should this happen more outside in? I'd be really curious to hear what people are thinking. I'm gonna keep beating on the financial and the healthcare drums there, trying to showcase what's possible with specs. Talking to European banking folks and whatnot right now, so.
Yeah, we were discussing the healthcare specs in API Days Helsinki that last past in the past couple of weeks, and I think that there was quite a lot of interest in well, both healthcare and banking, but also, for example, traffic related.
Yeah, yeah. The municipal and city level, I'm working with a data partner right now where we did a COVID kind of resource center, and then we're doing a U.S. election one right now around APIs and data for the U.S. election, and then we started looking at cities, like what do cities need right now, especially in a COVID time. But what are some of the common data sets? What's valuable? And I think municipal level data is pretty critical.
Yeah, the municipal level data is really critical, and there are a lot of small or medium-sized municipalities that are kind of in trouble because they don't have that many resources, and we're working, for example, with a few of them, and there is that kind of initial understanding is needed, like why would we need and what kind of data and interoperability we would need, but also then how do we buy or develop or do this, and what are the data models so that they are as flexible as possible but still kind of standard enough.
Yeah, I had a Knight Foundation funded. I got $35,000 in, I want to say it was 2016. It might have been 17, but for a project that I called Adopt a Agency, and it was born out of my work for the U.S. government, where I'd open up data sets for the federal government. And then in 2013, we had one of the shutdowns, and they shut off all the APIs. And then just some of the projects, you know, especially when the Trump administration took over, a lot of the data went away. And so I've been a big proponent of how do we make sure that these aren't entirely publicly owned, and that the public can be stewards of this data. And a lot of these cities who don't have the resources and budgets, you know, would welcome, you know, more community participation. But also from a reliability and access to that data, I think having private partnerships handling this is pretty critical.
Yeah,
So
and that's exactly the topic. And for example, in Finland and in Canada, we talked with the Canadian group and the professors there, but in both countries there's a law requiring actually, for example, traffic-related APIs to be open, and it is exactly for the private sector too, because the discovery was that the public sector alone cannot be taking kind of the responsibility for it. But in Canada, they have taken the Finnish model. Actually, they took the Finnish model and they took it even further, and they did a publicly funded kind of a middle layer on top of the private sector and kind of traffic operator APIs. And so if somebody wants to kind of use any bus operators or anybody's interfaces, then they can kind of connect to that publicly owned middle layer. But the point of it is that there is a law in both countries, so it kind of needs to be funded, or it needs to be funded as much as anything that has a law on it needs to be funded.
well, and I think that touches on why we're seeing industry level interest or movement forward when it comes to API specs. Is, you know, healthcare and banking, we have laws requiring APIs in PSD2 in Europe and FHIR in the US. And so I just think it really speaks to the role that laws play in helping kind of lay the foundation for this. And then we still got to figure out, well, where does the money come from? Where does, you know, how does that work? But I think those are important. It's an important note that laws are a big piece of it. One thing I'm also doing I'm gonna probably write a story on it again this week, is one of the things we push for as part of the U.S. government is the notion of micro procurement. So the basis is that if a federal agency can swipe it on a credit card, and I think the $10,000 was the limit, that they don't have to go through regular procurement processes. And I did a couple on the U.S. government. See if I can pull them up real quick. But on the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I did 3 projects for about 10 grand a piece. So I was able to make a decent amount of money doing the work, but it was all around governance and helping them understand. And my SEO, here it is, API governance models in the public and private sector. This was one of the reports that I did for them on kind of how the VA can do governance. And we did like interview series. I think we interviewed like Expedia, people from LinkedIn, and on their governance practices. And then we kind of distilled it all down into a report. I think there's a separate report. This was kind of my raw data. And so micro procurement as a way of tackling projects and doing it in small bite-sized chunks that fit on the credit card, don't get as much scrutiny, and don't have to go through all the procurement is a big one. So I'm going to kind of push on that as a model for funding specs, like creating an open API for government APIs. Can they fund outside parties to create an open API definition or set a JSON schema for an API and still make a little bit of money doing it? So I'm going to explore that this week in some storytelling. Sorry, trying to keep notes here as I'm talking. But I really feel like I'm going to keep looking for ways that the current COVID times kind of finding ways that API specifications can be used to make people's lives better. The Department of Veterans Affairs we took their open API definition. They have open APIs for all their APIs, and we took that and created a Postman collection. And part of the conversation with them doing that recently is they update their hospital hours and availability every 5 minutes in their API. And so it opened up the question of real time, and they don't have webhooks, they don't have any sort of synchronous APIs. but they're really determined, and they got the funding now to keep the API data up to date, and so that people can find hospitals, and they stepped it up for the suicide prevention and others, so that if you're a veteran, you can find the help you need, and that office hours are always up to date. And so now's the goal is, how do we get apps to really reflect that data? So web searches, mobile apps always are pulling from the APIs and not caching it, or following that caching logic, so that the data is always up to date, and veterans in the US can actually find the help they need. And so that was an interesting one. So I'm going to keep looking for things like that out of COVID that show the importance of APIs.
So was it published as like linked data and or kind of put the Google and others as a
Yeah, they do JSON LD, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the
So-
JSON. I did a lot of that. I worked with Google on JSON LD at the Department of Veterans Affairs when I worked there, and I know they've continued some of that work for that.
Yeah, because that is how it's done in Europe, in a lot of places, and for example in Finland, there's this linked data model for like JSON LD to publish kind of public locations and services and so forth, and also feedback and a few other things like events. So there's a data model for that, and it's kind of part of the whole kind of under the umbrella of smart cities, but that has been developed a lot, and it's used in a few different countries. But hey, there are James' comments here about the fire and the traffic stuff. So James is pointing out to this manual on uniform traffic control devices and national information exchange model, and I would be interested to know kind of a little bit more what's the kind of angle there. And then Frank is pointing out to the tooling vendors and their point of view as a podcast item. So are you guys kind of able to speak and say something about these? Because I think it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
if not, then just chat more.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would I was trying to write down some notes here on I know that James had talked about schema.org, and I didn't have any sort of schema.org JSON LD stuff, so I would like to flesh out more of that as part of the specs and bring in kind of that into the conversation. But I really feel like the transportation, I don't know how to do some of these kind of assessments of who's having these conversations. Like when it comes to travel, and we have someone in the OAI doing the travel. Jeff, who's the former OAI guy, is doing that.
Yeah, but these are two different streams. So there's a kind of a traffic interoperability stream, and then there's a travel stream. And for example, and even the travel is a little bit separated, because there are kind of flight guys and the other guys. But the travel, for example, I'm sorry, I'm so European here, but I know that European Commission has tried to come up with this kind of a directive or mutual plan on the traffic interoperability, but they were stuck on the model of how to get it done. And so Finland went first. A couple of years back, I was part of the kind of the legislation was done, and we have to figure out how to actually guide all the traffic operators to kind of be doing those interfaces. But then there was this specific model how that was done as a kind of a ecosystem, and then the European Commission was taking kind of that as a model. So there's stuff happening on European Union level, but I'm not sure how that is connected to kind of the more global streams of it, but I know that there are some standards also coming in some of the places as a global standard. And then travel is another story. There's some other stuff happening there.
Yeah,
and yeah.
I mean, I'm for each of these areas, I'm always looking to do what I consider a landscape analysis. Like, what I don't try to recreate anything. I just go, what already exists, what efforts are already in motion, and I'm so glad you're so European focused and you're willing to be on these calls because we're so bad Americans at being American focused and North American focused. So I think you're essential. And then I would say from a standards, realm that there's a lot of European standards that I think need more highlighting and showcasing, and models that are good and bad. I would say because I think there's some lessons in PSD two that are bad that we don't want to follow when we do spec rollouts in the future. So I think we need to kind of do an assessment of what's going on out there when it comes to traffic. I did a dive into this kind of whole world around municipal data, like what are the top data sets a couple years back, and I did it again recently where I was looking back through it, and that overlap of traffic and travel in the U.S. There's a standard called 511. We have 911, which is emergencies. 511 is traffic, travel, and transit. 411 is information. 311 is non-emergencies, and 211 is health and human services. And while looking into especially travel and transit, this whole world's been rocked by Google and Google Maps, and they basically, like, the 511 standard is dormant and dead because Google kind of came in and owned things and then sucked all the air out of the room. And so, and I know, especially when it comes to transit and real-time specifications, the RTFS for, man, I'm feeling your acronym, Maruka. This is like, sometimes acronyms is like the bane of our existence. But it's the real-time transit feed, and they've kind of just taken over the spec, and it's gRPC now, and Google's kind of steered it in their direction. And so when it comes to these standards, I think this is a constant thing we have to be aware of, is like, who are all the actors involved, who are all the stakeholders, but kind of doing a landscape assessment and getting an understanding of that for traffic and interoperability, I think would be pretty interesting. Oh man, yeah. So I added that just to see if I can flesh out. Added something about schema.org. I'd like to start doing more schema.org API deployment. I mean, I've done a lot of open APIs. I've had projects where I have schema.org open APIs for helping deploy APIs, but the JSON LD, I always forget about the importance of that when it comes to the semantics and kind of the linked data bridge.
Yeah, and also JSON LD is a really problematic thing with OpenAPI specifically, or at least has been so far.
Yeah, the point I was making is that the schema.org is an excellent example, but the process that you kind of shown was take one of those standards out there and go ahead, push it into Postman, and give an open API example, and then see where we can observe upticks. So, are they going to be picked up by other organizations? And I don't want to overwhelm folks with different standards and things like that, because it can become ridiculous, because for every single organization there seems to be another standard out there. But I just saw this as an opportunity for a process here that may get some results.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things caught your attention, see if I can Google it, but see if I have my latest, yeah. Oh, D-Zone picked it up. Oh, that's funny. It always cracks me up when D-Zone picks up my work and for others. That thing's not working. Well, I'll have to figure it out, but I created open APIs for each of the schema.org objects just as a basis, but I really find people don't like starting from standards, and like you said, I don't think people always understand the separation of the standards and specifications. Fran and I were talking about this Wednesday with async. He says he's actually working closer with Ben and JSON schema to help answer JSON schema questions on the async forums, because people don't understand that. They see it as being the async spec when it's actually a JSON schema question. And I'm guessing the same exists in the Open API realm, and there's nobody there to address those. So I think that's the separation of the specification onion, I guess, is an interesting conversation. But with Postman, one of the things I'm going to be doing with there's got to be a link to this. Let me find it. No, I haven't seen more adoption of JSON schema. As you guys will learn, my blog is kind of my memory bank, so I'm always trying to use it to find what I've worked on and what I've done. Well, I guess there's no good article on it, but trying to create a set of templates that people can start APIs. If you want to start a products API, it's a JSON schema. And so this is the basis for the union fashion work that I've been doing on, this is my reference implementation at Postman that I use for a lot of conversations. But it has a products API, and this products API is just JSON or schema.org. And so my model for building a new API is, a lot of people, when they build their open API, they start with the paths and the paths for the open API definition. I always start with the schema, because the schema, I start with, this is JSON schema or schema.org, JSON schema for schema.org. And I start with that, like, what am I going to be, what's the object that I'm passing? And then I create the CRUD methods if I need all of them. And then I start layering on the paths and the other functionality. But I know a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't kind of get their schema in order before they start defining. Most open APIs or swaggers that I find don't even have schemas associated with them. They're just purely the paths, the parameters, and headers. And so I kind of want to keep steering that towards schema.org, but people just really don't care about using common standards in that way, and it's frustrating sometimes.
So one organization to draw from is Microsoft. They're using a concept called model-based development. So what they did is they basically took their ERP systems, simplified them into a standardized model. And now what they're doing is doing code generation actually from that model out. So there's a little pathway there that they seem to have successfully put together.
Yeah, I find ways of supporting this is you can to make it easier. So this is something that I've discussed casually with people on other API IDEs that support that sort of development, to build a schema first. And what we're trying to do is actually bake it into their interface. I haven't seen the latest, but I think Stoplight just announced something this morning, some adjustments to their interface. There are these efforts to basically, just as Open API made it easier to design APIs in general, and then design also in a RESTful format, if you can bring, say, schema.org into the IDEs themselves, if there's a plugin or encourage the companies managing the IDEs to actually bake it into the product, that may actually steer a certain direction, or making it easier to design APIs that way once you've baked it into the product itself.
Yeah, and that actually is the argument of RAML. I have regular check-ins with the RAML team, and I should probably keep layering, bring him in here, and RAML's still alive, despite I think what some folks might want to say. They're moving the spec forward, and that's their claim, is that it's a modeling language, first and foremost. And so I think you're right. I think getting IDEs and tools, Postman's not there. Like this is the Postman Open API editor, and I've got a schema here, but we don't identify, have any tools. We heavily use JSON schema, but we don't enable any sort of modeling or reuse of models, objects within this. And I think that's an interesting direction. I'll check out what Stoplight's doing. try to
And
stay.
that was exactly the best part of using RAML, why we originally chose it in the first team ever I used any spec for API, because it was kind of guiding the modeling without having to kind of tell everybody that this is our style guide, you should do this, because the models were reusable.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, it seems backwards to me, but I always question my views of the world, that because I'm a database person. That was my origins to the world. Is so for me, an open API always starts with, hey, what does this API do? Here's my version. I won't even have a server. I just have a component schema, and I start with my JSON schema object and a basic array. And so, that was the thinking that went into RAML and as a modeling, is that you got to get your schema house in order before you start saying, okay, what's the access to this? How are we going to be actually manipulating and working with these objects? Yeah, I think that's an important notion, Jeremy, that the tooling, I mean, so much of this is tooling based. And this is my constant kind of gripe with the OAI and pushing is I really want to change the tooling, views on tooling and tooling support. And I don't know exactly what the right answer is for how far the open API should go when it comes to tooling. As far as, whether it should just support core open source tooling like validators, generators, and stuff like that, or all the way to actually supporting, service providers like Stoplight and Postman and others doing sensible things around the open API spec that encourage better behavior. So yeah, that's a pretty key one for me. Where was I? Yeah, interesting. So what was anybody else's API specification conference experience? How many of you guys did any talks or attended any? Was it, did you guys go? Any stories? Any war stories? No? Well, I'll give mine. I did one on API governance. It was just 30 minutes and talked about the role of specs when it comes to API discovery, and then ultimately governance, and then got 5 or so minutes and talked about regulations, kind of what we were just talking about here. But I was too busy to attend any other talks, so I'm really kind of dependent on the videos that are going to come out to be able to do that. Pretty critical. I'm looking at the site right now. Go ahead.
I really like the panel discussions. I was watching a few, like in the second day start panel discussion, and then the one in the kind of later where Lorna and the others were kind of telling the story of how the spec is actually being developed in all the meetings, and explaining how things have been and how things are now. And I think that both of those panels were really good, because they were really kind of getting you into the work and into the mindset of how people who practice API, especially in the real companies, are thinking, and especially in the big ones, and then kind of how the spec work is evolving.
That's an interesting one. Kind of back to the podcast, like, how do we get more of these stories about how people are working with the spec internally at their companies? I think that's pretty interesting. That doesn't always see the light of day. I know I have Salesforce in my inbox wanting more guidance on how they can use the spec, but then how can that drive their Postman kind of involvement. So there's a lot of questions. I think some enterprises are further along in their journey, and some are not so far along.
Salesforce was also quite interesting since in the API cycles method, because it seems that there is also that missing link of having a method of like which guides you through the whole process, not just the kind of technical spec process, but the whole process of productization. And I know, Kim, you have had that cycle kind of diagram, I think, quite a long time. But I mean, what are the phases, and what are the kind of things that you need to mind? And I'm seeing that interest, at least in Salesforce. And for example, Salesforce is a good example because they've done APIs for ages, but they are kind of in a situation where they probably need to renew how they are doing them, because they are getting a little bit legacy, let's say, in some part.
Yeah, and that refresh. I mean, there's several big API providers on that same front that I'm working with to do that, and I mentioned this. I don't remember a couple sessions ago, but Dropbox, they're still working on how they want to talk about this publicly. But I thought this is a great story. I'm trying to get them to tell it, but this is their API specification format, and they're creating how do you translate this to Open API, and it's called Stone. So I love that they've been writing their API specs in Stone for the last decade, and they're trying to shift their behaviors to an Open API driven world. And starting with docs, code gen is kind of, I think, one of the more critical aspects. So they're trying to figure this out right now as well. And Salesforce is particularly tough. I created a Salesforce, because the Salesforce API is different depending on your account. So what objects you have available to you, and then custom objects. So your API surface area is going to vary from user to user. So how do you build that dynamic capabilities in? And that's tough.
That was exactly my point when, well, I've seen Davis here back, but that was exactly my point some weeks ago when I was talking about the dynamic situation and the custom variables and stuff. Because in ERPs and systems where you have a lot of roles and a lot of tenants, you always have that issue. And a very kind of static spec is not going to handle that very well.
Yeah, I wrote this collection that grabs the root discovery endpoint for Salesforce and then loops through all of your objects, and then actually, so this is a collection builder with 3 requests in it, and then when you run one of the methods, it actually builds all of the endpoints in the collection itself. So it hydrates itself based upon the dynamic nature of your Salesforce. And I submitted this to them to review to see, and they're working on trying to figure out how to make it something real. But yeah, I would like to figure this out, because I don't want collections to be the central truth. I want the Open API to be the central truth of this, and then the collection can be generated from that Open API. But I got to figure that out. So.
Yeah, we actually solved it, like back in 2016ish or 14ish or something. We solved exactly, like, we were using RAML, but essentially the same problem, and we ended up doing this kind of metadata endpoints to solve some of the dynamic stuff, but then and only kind of specking out the required parameters, but essentially it's the same approach, but then we didn't yet have the way to fully do a hybrid media based kind of and dehydrated or hydrated API spec on it, but basically that is very similar to what I've seen working in real life, and it would be quite good for Salesforce, I think.
It's an interesting problem. One of the things I'm going to start layering in to these conversations, and for me, it's actually kind of the driving force behind this API specification toolbox for me, is APIs JSON. And if you're not familiar with what Steve and I did with APIs JSON, and I just refreshed the site for this, but APIs JSON is a discovery format that we created in 2014 and 15 that provides an index for your APIs. And I don't use it in JSON anymore, which makes the name unfortunate. So I actually have APIs.yaml as well, which is the same spec but YAML. And it is just a discovery format, but it's multi-spec. And if you look at my talk from the Async API conference a couple months ago, I kind of highlight this, that async in my brain. And so I'm really trying to, let me see, talk too much about them. I think this was it. Yeah, my talk from the virtual conference. No, that's the actual conference. But I use the Slack API as the example because the Slack API has, here's the walkthrough that I was looking for. But the Slack API has an open API which you can define, the information block for the API. You can define the HTTP web servers. I killed it. But basically, here's the open API for it. Man, it's long. That's why I have this walkthrough. You just do the walkthrough again. But it also has and you generate docs from that open API. But they also have an async API for their WebSockets API, for the messaging API. And it describes channels and tags and all similar things, but it uses JSON schema just like the open API uses. And again, that's for docs. And then here's the JSON schema. So I actually have separate JSON schema for the Slack API. And those are all used for validation, and they're part of, because Async and Open API both use JSON schema, it's used as part of those. I don't know what I'm talking about here. Well, I'm just talking about what I'm already saying. But in Open API, why don't I talk about APIs JSON here? It's kind of weird. But anyways, the APIs JSON can index all of those. So the goal is you can have a reference to the individual JSON schemas, the individual open APIs, the individual async, individual Postman collections, all for one API. And so it allows you to have, the central truth as open API, have the data, the JSON schema just for data validation, all standalone or in the open API. And then you can have Postman collections that execute different things like tests or build mocks or different things. And then, but it's all together in a single index. And then you have human links to sign up, docs, and the other kind of human readable things, as well as the machine readable. And so this is really this has been my long-standing multi-spec kind of umbrella. Is like I'm not convinced that everything should live in the open API definition. I think there should be many API specs, but as you guys all said, that we have a lot of clarification and cleaning up, and there's a lot of specs, and it gets really confusing fast. And so how do we help bridge that? And then how do we help bridge other aspects, like with Slack? You have an open API, which is HTTP 1.1, and then you have a WebSockets and an async. How do you switch gears between those? Because that's, you can switch between HTTP and TCP like that, and there's a header that helps you bridge that. So how do we express that in a specification or with a set of specifications? And Open API and async is how we define those surface areas, but how do we define the actions around that? And so I'm still trying to figure that out. But I'm also doing other things like rating systems with this. So this is what we did with the COVID-19 stuff recently. is have these COVID-19 resource center, and it's a listing of APIs for COVID-19, and I actually have provenance for them. So novel COVID's a good one. So we have the rating system brought by API Metrics that tells us monitoring wise, it's been monitoring it. This has a CAS score of 9, meaning it's been up and it doesn't have latency, it's performance. And it has really amazing provenance of the sources of data. And all of this feeds into a rating that floats this up as a really good quality API because it's up, it's available, and the data in this case, because it's COVID, is really important. And all of this is this whole entire toolkit is all just driven from the API's JSON file, and which is in a data folder. And if I click on it, see if I can find the novel COVID. Where is it?
So, Tim, I like your idea of trying to keep the model separate from the actions. I think it makes sense because of reusability and because maybe the people coming up with the model could sometimes be separate people from those coming up with the actions of the rest of the things in the specification. I think there's two things that have happened, two initiatives that have happened in Open API that haven't seen the light of day yet. One is overlays.
Yes.
And the other one I think is alternative schema. And both are talking about that layering or separation of things that you could have and point to that reusability. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be one particular format for modeling data structures. It could be, many different things. So I like that direction.
Yeah, no, I really want to be involved in, I know overlays is next. And, overlays, the relationship, I don't know much about alternate schema. I need to dive into that more. But the Venn diagram that is overlays, vendor extensions, alternate schema, and the original mission of API's JSON is really that multi-protocol, multi-spec conversation that I want to be having. And here's an example of here's a API's JSON property type, which should actually be an overlay, but it's the sources behind an API. And then here's that rating, that CAS score. So this is API metrics defined, and they have their CAS score, and that's what I use to render that visual object. And so coming back to overlays, like I have a whole list of overlays that I want to talk about as part of this next part of the roadmap for Open APIs. There's things that the relationship between Postman collections and Open API. We have scripts in collections, which Open API doesn't. Change management. I want to try to understand. There's not a lot of beyond just versioning in an Open API. How do you manage change and multiple files? And I know change management is a problem that a lot of people are facing. And then another is orchestration. Well, go ahead.
I just posted a link of something that's also similar. That would be interesting for to take a look at.
Oh, did you post it in the GitHub?
Yeah, Frank posted it in the chat right now.
Oh, in the
It's
chat.
the label.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
repo.
But maybe Frank put it in the conversation.
I'll make sure and open all these so that. Ooh, interesting. Yeah. See.
Similar concept to what you plan with APIs.json.
Yeah. No, this is great. This is great. Yeah, I know. Actually, Eric had talked to me about this. I did come up on my radar at some point. Yeah. Interesting. Here we are, related as well. APIs.json. So yeah. I kind of want this group to kind of move into that realm is being this kind of arbiter. I think overlays is going to suck us back into the OAI spec a little bit more. And I want to try to figure out these conversations. The other one that I'm concerned with Postman is the daisy chaining of API calls. So how do you do that? And then what's the evolution of the links object and all of that? So these are interesting conversations I want to keep pushing forward and understand a little bit more and try to come up with a way. And I want as many specs out there as possible, but how do you bring these together and do they exist as kind of an umbrella spec like APIs JSON? Do they exist as overlays? I think there's a lot of interesting conversations there. So I think I'll curb that there. I'm gonna start. I don't want to lose this chat. I'm gonna just copy it each time into my notes. That was a good hour, you guys. I think we covered some interesting issues. I think the industry, I think the traffic one is a pretty interesting one that we need to explore more. But I'm gonna spend some more time on the GitHub repo today. I think I'm gonna answer a few questions. I'm gonna keep working on my tools and services. I am also gonna do some work on this issue submitted. Extensions. This is again into this conversation around overlays and extending. So I think there's a lot of I want to create a project that's dedicated to vendor extensions and bringing together these multiple kind of areas where people like Mike have been defining extensions. So I'll be doing some work there as well. But anything else you guys want to throw in before we close up this week? No? Cool. Well, it's good to see all your faces. Thanks for coming out this week. Sorry, took a long weekend last week, but feeling very refreshed. If you guys look at any of the interesting videos for Ask Conference, bring your ideas and thoughts next week. Maruka, I'll be pinging you about next week a little more information that we can have a conversation after the regular meeting, and we'll see what we can stir up. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Right.
Bye.